health providers for the last 5 years.
Bless you.
Thanks.
I don't know which is worse.
Bless you.
Yeah.
How they set up the stage?
Oh, they had another chair, and they made. Yesterday they had 3 chairs facing Eric. Today they have Eric and another chair facing 2 chairs on the right. So it's like 2 people talking to 2 people rather than 3 people talking to 1.
So it's gonna be 2 conversations going on at one time. How you gonna pull that off?
I don't know. Let's see how he does it.
I'm retired Chief Patrol Agent Chris Clemens. In my over 27 years as a Border Patrol Agent, I've never seen border this bad. Under the Biden administration, we're facing the worst border crisis in the history of our country. And that's why I've partnered with Americans for Prosperity. Washington think tanks talk. Politicians play political football. But Americans for Prosperity is actually doing something about the crisis. AFP has taken hundreds of concerned citizens to the border to see it for themselves, sharing policy solutions, organizing communities, educating, training, and mobilizing concerned citizens, advocating for real, tangible reforms that will provide more infrastructure, more agents, and more technology. In other words, AFP is advocating for reforms that will make us safer and stronger. And that's what makes AFP different. They aren't interested in political games. They're interested in results. Because Americans for Prosperity is where freedom and opportunity win. Learn more at secureamerica.com.
I've been partnering with Americans for Prosperity for a number of years now, and I refer to it as a do tank, not a think tank, because when you learn in Washington, you have all these organizations, and they write white papers that make themselves look good, and they trade the white papers internally at the organization, and maybe occasionally members of Congress. But Americans for Prosperity actually goes into the states to do the business of the conservative movement. They knock on doors, they train people to be activists, they go to local governments and state governments. They were a huge player in the school choice movement of the nation, including here in Georgia. They knocked on doors and mobilized people in the districts of the 15 Republicans who were opposed to school choice in the state and helped persuade enough of them to vote for it in the state. Would not have gotten done without Americans for Prosperity. They didn't just broadly target, they micro-targeted inside local legislative districts, finding Republican voters to persuade the Republican legislatures to say, we're going to vote against you in a primary if you don't do this. And they folded. And we got school choice in the state. Would not have happened but for Americans for Prosperity. They not only do that, they focus on border issues. They focus on free market issues, deregulation for small business, and family issues. It's my great pleasure to bring up my friend Akash Chogal from Americans for Prosperity.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here.
Eric's
so,
not up
as
there.
Eric mentioned, many of you are
It's just
probably
4 of them.
familiar with AFP, the 501c4 social welfare policy advocacy organization. But what you may not be familiar with is our network recently, over the last couple of years, also formed a super PAC, Americans for Prosperity Action, which exists to expressly advocate for the election of policy champions. So AFP is the largest organization of its kind in the country dedicated to advancing the conservative movement. But the reason we wanted to come here and talk about AFP and AFP Action isn't just because we believe we're doing important work and we appreciate our partnership with Eric, but it's because we appreciate our partnership with all of you. I know that by virtue of listening to Eric, being here, watching online, that you all are some of the most principled and dedicated conservative activists in the country, which is why it was important to us as an organization to give you a peek under the hood at what we do. So we're fortunate today to be joined by Drew Klein, who is a regional vice president of Americans for Prosperity and originally from Iowa. Ashley Klingensmith is also a regional vice president of AFP. and from Pennsylvania, and then Matt Henkel is on the AFP Action political team and is from Wisconsin. So they have some great sort of regional, national, and also state-based perspectives to share with us. So Matt, let's start with you. Kick us off. I mentioned that our efforts are the largest of their kind in the country for AFP and AFP Action. Give us some numbers behind that electoral effort. What does that actually look like this cycle?
Sure, Josh. A lot of people are familiar with AFP in their own state, whether it's lobbying the state house or whether it's engaging in elections, but we just got some fresh numbers in last night, so I'm just gonna read this out. We've already engaged in basically all the competitive U.S. Senate races in the country. So we're in Montana, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan. We've gone fully into our Doors plan. We've got ad buys up in the 7 figures in almost all of those states. What we started to see is that we needed to engage earlier and more often in races across the country, especially at the federal level. In 2020, when we started this project, we were at 272 races around the nation. Last year, we were up to 457. This year, we're already at 500, and we'll be surpassing that as the cycle goes on. We started as early as in Michigan back in September of last year. And so what we found is that sustained effort into these races has really been paying dividends because of the work that had been done in all the other efforts, whether that was knocking on doors for school choice, whether that was tax reform issues, taking the things we've learned and applying it right away into competitive seats really gives us the advantage.
So tell us a little bit about what went into the thought process to form the Super PAC. AFP itself has been around for 20 years. We celebrated our 20th anniversary earlier this year. What was the need to form a Super PAC and what went into that decision?
Sure. I mean, the forming of the Super PAC is really a natural progression of everything that AFP has done in the past and the policy work that was going on. Just knowing that good policy produces good politics. So by forming the Super PAC, that allowed us to take it to scale up and go from a state-by-state basis. We have physical chapters in 36 states and a full 50-state strategy. So we'll be engaging even in places where we don't have a physical chapter, New York, Connecticut, out west, California, Idaho, and taking that and the Super PAC allows us to just branch out and be a broader base.
Absolutely. So, Drew, let's bring you in here. One of the things we're adamant about is it's something that we share with Eric and all of you, I think, is that we'll never just be an appendage of a political party, right? We do politics because we care about advancing good policy, because we care about people. And people's lives aren't improved just because one party wins an election, as you all know quite well. So talk a little bit about that. What does that mean when we engage in politics for the purpose of policy? Can you give us an example of where that's actually come to fruition?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important. I mean, if we just zoom out and look at the American people, they're tired of partisan politics. That they don't find themselves in a camp. That the reason that we see the dysfunction in Washington is largely because what we see out of our elected officials just doesn't reflect the American people. When we instead lead on policy instead of that partisan divide, not only do we connect with more voters than some of the other folks that operate in the same space, but when we secure those wins and then also the policy wins, they're just far more durable because they weren't based on some whim of the moment, political favoritism, anything like that. But we do that by really leading with the policy efforts. So, if I zoom out and go back in my time as state director in Iowa, in 2015, Iowa was very much a purple state. We had a split legislature and a Republican governor. Our federal delegation was kind of a 50-50 split. And we spent a significant portion, really the second half of 2015, running a door survey, out talking to folks on their doorsteps about a number of issues that we thought were really important. If we fast forward and then jump into 2016, we took the information about where swing voters in districts that we knew were going to be competitive, where they stood on the issues. We then went out and talked about what if we could actually execute on those? What if we could actually cut taxes? In 2015, Iowa had the second highest corporate income tax rate in the country, and we were ranked 43rd in the country for personal income taxes. We're now, in the top 10 most competitive tax states in the country for states that still have an income tax. And I think we're on the trajectory to eliminate the personal income tax entirely. But we did that by going out and first having a conversation about policy. What do you think about taxes? What do you think about education? What do you think about the regulatory environment and how competitive we are economically? And then from that, we started talking about candidates and where they stood on those same issues. So people were not picking who they liked better when they filled out their ballot. They were really voting for what they wanted the future of Iowa to look like. We do that at every level in the races that we engage in by defining the race based on policy, not on personalities.
Absolutely, and we're going to start talking about the strategy in these key U.S. Senate races here in a moment. But before we do, as a segue, have you seen that strategy trickle up and matter at the federal level? You're talking about engagement at state legislative issues and state legislative races. How does that actually trickle up to the federal level?
Yeah. Well, Eric introduced us by talking about the education fight here in Georgia. That is something that has been replicated across the country. Iowa also is a universal ESA state. We did that by engaging in Republican primaries and taking out a number of incumbents or pushing the scales our direction to elect Republicans that were actually going to vote for the policy outcome that we wanted. And did that in partnership with a number of other groups, a governor that was pro-school choice, all of those things. But it's not just Iowa and Georgia. That's happened across the country. It's happening in Texas. It happened in West Virginia. It's happened in a number of places. If we zoom out and just look at the case study of Iowa, right now every member of our federal House delegation is a former state legislator. Half of our Senate delegation, actually technically both halves of our Senate delegation are former state lawmakers as well. I did not work with Chuck Grassley in the state legislature. But those are like relationships, and they start to understand how we operate, and they take the principles of how to do things correctly in the state legislature and carry those on to Washington. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the bench for federal candidates is our state legislature. And so the way that we operate and start to build a policy environment in the states is going to continue to drive change in Washington. A good example, you hear Trump spent a significant amount of time at the National Convention talking about right to try as a major accomplishment. We passed that in 35 states around the country before it was taken up in Washington. The policy outcomes and what we prove to be possible in the states sets us up for success at the federal level as well. It's frustrating, it takes a little bit more time, but we know we're moving the trajectory of the country in that direction.
Absolutely. So, Ashley, you're coming from Pennsylvania. The strategy obviously looks a little bit different in a much more purple state. Again, we'll talk about the Senate race in a second here, but even at the state legislative kind of ground game level, what are some of the insights and things that folks should know goes on in a purple state as far as the things Drew's talking about?
Yes, well, it's not so rosy in Pennsylvania as it is Iowa, but we're working on it. But yeah, for the first time in 13 years, our state House of Representatives flipped from Republican to Democrat. And we have 2-year legislative sessions. So right now we are in the 2023-2024 session. And we have had months where they cannot even do business because the margin between a 1-seat majority has literally been hanging in the balance because of special elections or people being out. So it has been a totally frustrating operating environment. And the thing about Pennsylvania that's unique is we are a full-time year-round legislature, so these guys and gals make 6 figures. They do very well. So consequently, our expectations are adjusted, they're pretty high. So this session, we have been able to get a number of things done, some really good healthcare reforms, and also an amazing First Amendment free speech bill, anti-SLAPP legislation, which we've been working on for over almost a decade, I would say. So we were able to get that done. But what I'll say about our political strategy at the state level for our General Assembly members this cycle is that it is the guys and gals that truly was the prime sponsor on policy. Those are the people we are going to be supporting. And conversely, the folks who are going to be opposing and trying to ensure their defeat were against us on a number of consequential things. So our strategy is really rooted in like what did and did not happen this session. So there's a lot of seats we could play in, but we're being quite discriminatory and choosing the ones that have members doing the outstandingly good and bad stuff.
Absolutely. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes a little bit. Let's start with Pennsylvania, which again, as this group knows, could be the be-all end-all at the federal level this year.
Pressure.
Folks, no pressure. Folks will hear from Dave McCormick in a little bit, I think, but what does the ground game look like? Who are we targeting? What are the strategies, tactics, and kind of what are we hoping to do by November?
Yeah, so I'm happy to share this. We have 12 full-time staff. I just pulled this 226 part-time staff. And we have volunteers in all 67 counties that have partnered with us on the McCormick race since April 1st. And on Wednesday, just a couple days ago, we crossed over 400,000 door knocks since April 1st, which is the thank you. Yes. And so certainly, like, the strategy is absolutely layered with mail, with digital ads, with phone calling. We've got people, actually volunteers here in Georgia have helped us in Pennsylvania call some of the more rural households that are just, maybe over a mile from the next home we're trying to get to, that just doesn't make sense efficiency-wise for us to go knock. But people are filling in that gap with calls, which is awesome, and we're so grateful for that. I'll say on the ground right now, we are basically working in a vacuum, which is such a blessing. Starting so early, we've had this runway that no one else has. I'm certain that groups like Planned Parenthood Action and others will descend on PA after Labor Day, as they typically always do. But right now, we really are like the lone foot soldiers. And I love illustrations. And so I literally brought the mail that came into our mailbox. It's just me and my husband. I'm just gonna fan this out. But this is 42 pieces of mail that came to our home for the Oz Fetterman race in 2022, just in the month of October. 42 pieces just for that race. And last night, my husband and I watched the world news, and I think the only ad that was not political was a pharmaceutical ad. So all of that is noise. What is gonna cut through the noise is the conversations on doorsteps. That's what people are gonna remember. Like, we are impacting hearts when we go visit someone's home. And so we're committed to that, and we set a pretty lofty goal of 1 million doors. So hold us accountable to it.
Absolutely, 1 million doors by November. Now, as far as who these doors are, Ashley, in Pennsylvania, what goes into deciding who we're targeting? We're not sort of at random knocking doors. I mean, how do we decide who we're targeting, what part of the state, their level of sort of political alignment? Who are they? How do we figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, at the core, these are swing voters. We certainly are going to people that might lean a bit liberal or lean a bit conservative, but at the core of our target universe, which again, we started on April 1st, and which we hope to get through by like the first week of October, so then we can switch to get out the vote. But this persuasion universe is people right in the middle. And like, I heard the greatest way to describe them once, and it was like, we've got saints, sinners, and savables. And like, we don't need to be talking to the saints because they all concur. They're gonna go out there. We don't need to be talking to the other really extreme side of things, but the middle is who decide elections in Pennsylvania. And so certainly we have a robust operation in the Pittsburgh and Philly suburbs. There are a number of collar counties around each of those cities that tend to decide things. But there's also Center County, where Happy Valley is, Penn State, no booze, I hope. But that's a very important area, and then so is Erie up in the far northwest. And so we have people also kind of, concentrating efforts in those areas as well. But we're 67 counties, and all those people are going to vote this year with a top of the ticket presidential race. So, but we're really focused on that middle sweet spot.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of insights from Pennsylvania. We'll get into Georgia specifically towards the end, and I think we're learning a lot of lessons that we're going to hope to apply here, and folks should meet our great state director in Georgia here, Tony West, who's joining us as well. Shout out to Tony if he's somewhere here. So, Drew, I want to kick it back to you. Ashley mentioned that the mail, the TV, and all that, it kind of just becomes noise. What really matters are the conversations at the door. We've actually done the data analysis to know how much of a net difference that makes. What do those numbers look like? How do we figure that out? And what does that actually look like as far as the amount of difference it makes? And the races are decided by very, very narrow margins.
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the things that sets us apart from the campaigns. The campaigns are on a dead sprint to throw as much as they can at the race before they hit the finish line. Because we're a permanent operation that's around cycle after cycle after cycle, we've spent a lot of time and quite frankly invested in really understanding what works and what doesn't work and how we move that needle. So you saw the massive stack of mail from October of last year in Pennsylvania. I'm an Iowa caucus voter. You should have seen my mailbox in the way that works. But voters, and I think if you just think about yourself, we tune that stuff out because there's just so much of it that the volume really just overwhelms voters. We still do mail. We're pretty tactical about when and how and the messaging and all of those things. We increasingly do a lot of digital ads. We've got these massive TV buys as well, but even those are very targeted so that we can get to the right voters. Everybody is doing those things. You heard Ashley say, though, we're the only group on the ground knocking doors. And I remember this becoming really clear to me. Door knocking does a number of things, especially when you start early. We know that in tight political races, the last month, 45 days, is going to be nothing but just a mudslinging negative campaign fight. When we go out and start knocking doors and defining our candidates in real conversations with actual voters, we inoculate those candidates against late attacks that come in the cycle. Because neighbors start saying, well, gosh, I had Ashley show up in my doorstep. She didn't seem like a crazy person. She seemed to think and live a life that I can resonate with. She was processing the election the way that I think about things. Maybe what I'm hearing on TV or seeing in my mailbox isn't true about candidate X, Y, or Z. That is a unique value proposition that you only get through door knocking and talking to voters personally. We certainly start with the script. These are the things that we want to be able to talk about. But the reality is these are live human conversations. So voters bring up all kinds of concerns and questions. They ask you about the attack that they just heard about the candidate, and we're walking them through why not only is that not true or a total picture of the candidate, but then reminding them what they actually care about. What are they voting for? And I think that is just a very different proposition. But again, where we started this is we measure the impact of this as well. When we layer door knocking on top of mail and digital, we don't get a universal, exponential lift because we break that down into demographics. The reality is if you're a 22-year-old single girl, you probably don't want strangers knocking on your door. Maybe it's not as impactful there. But folks in their 40s, 50s, older voters in their 70s, 80s, I don't see any of those in the room today, but they actually really enjoy those conversations on their doorstep, and it makes a difference in the way that they behave politically in a substantial way. It's the reason that we invest so heavily in the capability to be able to go out there and do that. Mail is relatively cheap, digital ads are cheap, radio is cheap, doors are wildly expensive. but we do it because it's the difference maker in races time after time after time.
Absolutely. Matt, before we turn to Georgia, any other sort of numerical data points or insights from the national electoral level that are important for folks to know as they assess, involvement with AFP action?
Yeah, less so about the data points, but just when AFP is engaging in races, they talked about the swing universe. Like, winning elections is the art of the 50+1, and some of this stuff is just, everybody knows it, but we overcomplicate it at times. And it's that swing universe that makes the difference. It's those kind of voters that are going to get you across the finish line. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out ways to move that needle in close races. We don't generally endorse in runaway elections. Places where we know that the candidate we prefer is going to win. And I've had a lot of tough conversations with candidates where they said, come on, can't AFP just endorse me? It'd be nice. I said, you don't want that. Like, you want us focusing our time and our efforts on the ones that are the ultra competitive races. And to that point, just this last year, we're at a 71% win rate in places where the numbers say it's +1 or 2 either direction. So like in the tightest elections in the country, when AFP engages, we're winning 71% of the time. When we get involved in the primary and help really principled candidates get through that primary, we're up to almost 80% of the time that we win those races. So starting earlier is always better, and it's leading to results.
Great, so that hopefully gives you a good idea of what the ground game looks like state legislatively and trickling up to the federal level. And I want to hone in on Georgia here a little bit. As Eric mentioned, the big school choice victory, Tony had a number of great legislative victories that Governor Kemp signed into law. And there's a lot of great progress being made here. Just give us an idea of what these state legislative efforts look like. Maybe Ashley, let's start with you and then turn to you, Drew. As far as like strategy, tactics, and what we're doing, doors and nail, what does it actually look like? How are these state policy fights different than a political effort? And what goes into figuring out how that engagement is going to be as you look to the long-term impact in a place like a Georgia and Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, I think a policy campaign looks very similar, to be honest. Like our education savings account bill here, that work involved a lot of doors. And so I don't know which members of Team Georgia are in the room, but Tony stood, but is David, Shane, Jacqueline, Jeff, Logan, or Dawn in the room? Yes, everyone, meet them. They lead incredible work. And they did it all throughout the legislative session. They had an incredible lobby day that I got to witness. But I think one of the things I would just say, and again, when I see your gold dome, like I have immediate envy because most of what you can do here is like a pipe dream in Harrisburg. But what I will say about that ESA vote that was just so interesting is that there were, I want to make sure I get the numbers right, but there is a Republican House majority of 101 right now. And to get a bill passed, you need 91 votes. There were 90 Republican votes and 1 Democrat vote to get to the 91st for the ESA bill to pass out of the House. So like partisan majorities do not matter. Policy majorities matter. And so those 11 guys and gals are likely going to remain in office for the 2025 legislative session. And you better believe like Tony and the team are going to be like hawks watching what they do. I encourage you to visit the website and look at our scorecard. That is an amazing accountability tool for members in real time as session is progressing. And then of course on the federal side, 16 members of the delegation, and I think the most heartache that all of us look at when we think about Georgia is your U.S. Senate complement, and so we can do better there. But really, like we are a 365-day-a-year shop, and we are watching the guys and gals in Atlanta just as close as we are in DC. So please get to know Team Georgia because they will plug you in however, like they will meet you where you are. So if you say, hey, I'm just willing to put my name on a letter to the editor, like they will take that. And certainly if you're willing to make a phone call, knock a door, we'll take that as well.
Absolutely. So Matt, turning it back to you, when you look at Georgia from a political standpoint, both state level and federal level, I mean, what is your assessment of where the state is today and then where it could be 5 or 10 years from now, what it's going to take to get there?
Sure. I want to start building on the point that Ashley made about how policy majorities are very, very important. If you want to see the alternative of it, look at Tim Walz's Minnesota, where you have 1-seat majorities and they ran through everything on the wish list. Versus in a lot of states, and you know what, up until recently, Georgia has been really putting the foot on the gas more so, but like when you have majorities, take advantage of them, use them. And again, because it creates electoral success. When you're showing voters that you're doing things that they want to see done, making life better for regular people, you're gonna win more elections too. And so Georgia's a perfect example where I think like the momentum is there, it's building, and you have kind of a tale of two states here. Your state legislature and governor, Republican controlled since the early 2000s, and it's a steady control there. So you have stability and the ability to get things done. Alternatively, on the statewide elections, whether it's the presidential race or the US Senate races, they're ultra competitive. And I think that by succeeding more at the state policy level, you're gonna make voters realize, hey, I need to turn out for those other elections too, and help get it across the finish line.
Absolutely. Drew, are there states that you can point to where that particular model is working? We work in a lot of states that are sort of deep red on the surface level, huge state legislative Republican majorities, but are competitive at the statewide level. Any lessons for folks here to take away about their involvement and the difference it can make up the ballot?
Yeah, not to keep everything in my home state of Iowa, but you know, I talk a lot about the difference between the mindset of a Republican trifecta makes a huge difference. Right now, Iowa is in the middle of its longest held Republican trifecta, longest partisan trifecta since the early 70s, where we restructured and went to the modern format, number of legislative seats and whatnot. The last Republican trifecta before the current one was in the late 90s, and I compare those two trifectas a lot. You know, when I'm talking to audiences in my home state of Iowa, I just ask them, like, what did the Republican trifecta in the late 90s give us? The answer is almost nothing. Like, there's nothing memorable about the Republican trifecta of the late 90s in Iowa. You know, they made some modest incremental tax reforms that didn't really move the needle, but there's just nothing memorable. But I could tick through a list of big accomplishments just in the last, 6, 7, 8 years, and I think that matters because in Iowa we're still a majority independent, no party vote state. We're not a deep red state when we look at the voters. The difference is independent voters are looking for results. They want to know where we're going. And I've said that several times already, but if you don't give them that vision, if you don't deliver on your promises as a Republican trifecta, it's only a matter of time before those same voters are going to give the other side an opportunity to test their ideas. And that becomes critically important then for the overall political behavior of the state. If the Republican trifecta in Iowa, or I know the next speaker coming up is from Oklahoma, and I think you heard from their governor yesterday, if those states actually deliver on a vision and a promise to the voters, then it's going to continue to move the needle up ballot as well. It's worked in Iowa, it's working in other states as well, but you have to have politicians that are willing to be statesmen, that are not just there to hang out and enjoy the cocktail receptions in the evenings, but actually have a list of items that they want to accomplish, and then ideally come with that mindset of I'm coming to get something done, and then I'm going to go home and I'm going to be a dad, I'm going to be I'm going to contribute to my community locally as well. But you've got to have somebody that's truly there to get something done, not just be there and fill a seat.
Absolutely, and that's a great segue here in the last few minutes. I want to hone in on something that Eric has talked about a lot this weekend with a number of folks, and that is some of the concerns we're seeing substantively on the right within the Republican Party, including from a lot of sort of self-described conservatives, right? We've always had an issue with moderates in our party. We kind of move left on economic issues, but more and more, we're seeing this a lot in Washington at the federal level. It's starting to take place at the state level, in a lot of kind of Rust Belt states, but even here in states like Georgia and elsewhere where this sort of like level of populism is increasing, and it's causing folks who are frankly quite conservative on a lot of non-economic issues start to move left on pretty core conservative economic policies, on tax issues, labor issues, antitrust issues. I want each of you to kind of touch on that in your experience, Matt, when you assess candidates at the national level. Pennsylvania obviously is kind of the heart of that conversation in a lot of ways, and Drew, and even some of these deeper red states. I mean, could each of you talk about, in your particular roles, how you're seeing this and how you're thinking through our role in preventing its spread and keeping the conservative movement hewed to conservative economic ideas? Matt, first with political assessments.
Sure, we spend a lot of time reaching out to candidates as they start to run, or recruiting candidates too. I mean, we've recruited 119 candidates across the country this cycle to run for office, because I think we've all seen that just having an R next to your name isn't enough. Like, a lot of people can go either to their state house or to Washington and cast a vote. Very few are willing to lead on really the toughest issues we're seeing right now, whether it's the national debt, and I mean, go down the list. So as we're looking for leaders, we really just start to ask them those hard questions. We have a vetting process that we go through and ask just about some of the things you've touched on there, and we're looking for people who are the most aligned that can lead. And if they don't check those boxes, like, we're not here to just help all candidates across the board. We want to see the ones that are principled and build those majorities so that we can push back against some of those ideas that really are going to be harmful in the long run. But we also have to give disaffected voters a reason to support someone else. And I mean, they're not wrong in what they're feeling. A lot of them have felt left behind. A lot of them have seen, their communities be decimated by, frankly, bad policy. And so providing that alternative and having candidates that can communicate that and actually resonate with the voters is exactly what we're looking for.
Actually, Pennsylvania is where this conversation sort of lives, but is that really a pulse in the conservative grassroots, and how do those conversations go when you try to keep them more to limited government?
Yeah, I think the reason the conversation is even happening is because it is personal to everyone in Pennsylvania. You've all probably heard of the moving company North American Van Lines. They're the big red and blue trucks. Well, they put out a migration report every year, and once again in 2023, Pennsylvania was a top 5 outbound migration state. So what our legislature and sometimes chief executive try to do is like dangle these rotten carrots, like giving $2 billion to Jeff Bezos to build an Amazon headquarters by our Pittsburgh airport. And so that was this conversation that was happening a couple of sessions ago. And we're like, let's just reform our tax code and make us competitive again. But like, those sort of tough decisions seem to be just completely overshadowed by those like kind of last minute band-aids when things are dire. And so, what we're trying to reimagine with members, particularly freshmen, is like, what is the art of the possible here? And we actually can have a comprehensive tax reform bill. We've worked with multiple incredible think tanks to come up with the ideas that should be prioritized in that. And just set the expectation that we are not going anymore to support Harrisburg deciding like winners and losers through, tax giveaways at our expense. I live in an older town outside of Pittsburgh. Our main street is decimated, and so those guys and gals didn't get a fair shake in Harrisburg. It's like the big lobbyists that do. So we are really trying to right-size expectations of new members, that we are going to key vote any legislation that has any bit of corporate welfare in it, and it's going to be reflected on our scorecard, and their constituents are going to know about it. And so I think that's one of the best ways to start to have the conversation around what we should do for the long term instead of these short-term band-aids.
true here in Georgia and in other red states, it manifests itself a little bit differently. It's folks say, hey, we're mad at woke capitalism and we're mad at outsourcing and things like that. And so we think the answer is to punish big business and punish the wealthy and become pro-union. How should folks here think about that if they start to hear that stuff bubbling up in a state like Georgia?
Yeah. Let me start with a thin defense of state legislators, not in a... If you look at the volume of legislation that moves through a state capitol and the spectrum of issues that get dealt with, lawmakers, there's just no way that any one lawmaker is going to be an expert on all of the legislation that moves through their chamber. And so they take shortcuts. They just have to. It's one of the reasons that we spend time, talking to lawmakers about policy, is so that we can connect them to sources of information and help increase that. But ultimately, they make decisions either based on what they think is the right policy. We hope that's always the way that they're making policy. But oftentimes they're also thinking about whether or not this policy is good politics. Our belief is that good policy is good politics, but I think for a long time we have just assumed that Republicans think the right way on labor policy, and there is just a lack of depth, I think, in a lot of lawmakers to really think about, well, how did we get here? Why do we believe that right to work is good policy? Well, it's because, forcing somebody to be associated with a group they don't want to be is a violation of their First Amendment. And when you dangle employment over their head as like the threat, then we're only compounding the issue. We think prevailing wage is a bad idea that wastes taxpayer resources unnecessarily on projects, and so we oppose it. But I think we've gotten really comfortable just assuming that Republicans all agree with those positions. And what we've seen increasingly, and this happens a lot in red states, because you have more and more folks who are like, well, if I want a seat in the legislature, then I'm going to have to put an R by my name. There's no principles behind that. They're literally just making that political calculation. So you hear this like subtle argument sneaking in of like, well, think of how much we could expand our tent if we just, if we moved a little bit on this policy, or we gave a little bit here, if we departed from the principles that put us in the position we're in right now. And I think there's two different ways to look at that. If we want to go out and make an argument to blue-collar workers in this country that they're better under our limited government policies, great, we should be doing that. And we'll win that argument because we have the results. We see it in the migration among states. If instead we want to make an argument that's really just a political shortcut of we're going to sell out our principles to go reach this new group of people, we're going to end up getting nothing. We will not have policy wins or political wins. And so I think we've got to just continue to remind people why we believe what we believe and point to the results of good policy.
Absolutely. I think in closing, we saw firsthand at the RNC what happens when you just sort of take the political shortcut, right? They invited the president of the Teamsters Union to come out and rail against employers and things like that. And it was very, very unfortunate because that kind of thing is unnecessary to win over blue-collar workers in this country. States like Georgia do it every day where they're attracting people with good policy, with conservative visions. Governor Kemp and Tony's team, they're continuing to build on that track record. But I think the big takeaway that we're hoping for all of you today is that the accountability matters and the involvement matters. It matters keeping the conservative movement conservative on the issues that matter most. And that's important politically at your state level, and that becomes important politically at the federal level in the future of the country as well. There are very few states as important as this one over the next 5 or 10 years. And so we hope you'll really take that to heart and choose to get involved with us, because frankly, not only does the future of the conservative movement and the Republican Party rely on it, but largely the future of the country relies on it here in Georgia as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Millions at the local, state, and national level to improve people's lives. Everyday Americans, supported by AFP to advocate for common sense solutions.
They're out there making a living.
Empower parents with their children's education.
We reduce taxes on
hardworking families in West Virginia.
AFP's unparalleled grassroots network is delivering real, tangible results.
Yep, we're unleashing flexible benefits to support a strong workforce out west.
And making housing more affordable for Montana families. We're millions strong in local offices in every corner of the country. You can become a part of something bigger than politics as usual. Join AFP to reignite the American dream. Americans for Prosperity, where freedom and opportunity win.
So, my next guest, let me tell you a story I tell, and I wrote it in a book one time. You know, in Mark chapter 5, there's that scene where the demon-possessed men, they approach Jesus, and they say, Son of Man, don't destroy us. And they're like, well, what does he want? And it's like, well, there's a herd of pigs. Cast us in the herd of pigs. So he throws the demon, who are legion, for there are many, into the herd of pigs, and they run down the hill, and they drown in the water. Well, demons are eternal, so they had to do something after the pigs died, so they invented this thing called Twitter. And that explains social media. It is a cesspool. It's a terrible, terrible place. But occasionally, you find real gems on social media. And my next guest, I actually started following him on Twitter, and he's actually fantastic on Twitter. But even more than that, he happens to have gotten elected as the state school superintendent for the state of Oklahoma. And it is actually my pleasure to bring on stage someone who gets more hate than I do on social media, and also does a great job advancing the future minds in this country. Ryan Walters, state school superintendent of Oklahoma. So first, you're overly polite. You gotta stop saying, sir, my dad is over here. So he's the Mr. Erickson. I'm just Eric. Thank you honestly, thank you for coming from Oklahoma. And I want to begin with you in the same way I did with the governor yesterday. You all have this wild situation now in your state between who are Native Americans, who are American citizens, and taxes. How does that play out in dealing with the state school system?
Yeah, you know, one of the things here in Oklahoma, you know, we've been very excited to lead the country in education reform. You know, we understand that parents know best for kids. We understand that education needs to be more about ensuring that kids love this country, understand the history of this country, and then go on to lead successful lives. And so, you know, when we work with the tribes. It's one of those situations where we continue to navigate Supreme Court rulings that come in and up in the state. So it's something that we continue to work with the tribes to try to make sure that every kid's got a great education.
Now, I gotta dive into the hate that you get on social media from teachers unions. I mean, good Lord, you and Corey DeAngelo in the school choice movement, you have been a major advocate for kids in your state and against just, and I don't, like in Georgia, we don't actually have the big teachers unions because we're right to our state. What is it like though working with these teacher groups in a state that are just upset that you're holding them accountable for failure to teach?
You know, it's pretty remarkable. You know, and one of the things I would like the audience to make sure that you hear from me is, even in red states, your teachers unions, your left-wing activists control so much of your education system. And I want to give you an example of that. So when I win this election, I come and take office, I come to the State Department of Education, and along all the walls are the portraits of the former heads of the teachers unions. So when you come into work every day, it's like, this is who you work for. You work for all the teachers union folks. So I came in first day, sat my senior staff down, and I said, folks, I want you to notice what was on the walls, all these pictures of the heads of the teachers unions. We're taking them all down, okay? We're gonna put up pictures of kids, parents, because that's who we work for, right? We don't work for the teachers union, we work for parents and kids. Folks, you would think I went to a back alley and killed a bunch of cats or something, because the media, and guys, that was 2 years ago. There's not 3 months that don't go by that the media doesn't run a story about, when are you going to put them back up? Why have you taken their portraits down? Literally, I had even some Republican lawmakers try to pass a bill requiring me to put them back on the wall. But it just shows you how the left, I mean, I will give them credit. They've done an incredible job of capturing education. They understand that if we control the schools, we can put every kid on a pathway to a pride parade. We can put every kid into this transgender ideology, this woke mentality on everything. And if we control the school system, hey, we can lose other sectors of society, but that's one of the most influential areas. And so they fight like crazy. Every reform we do, they pass out pamphlets. Here's how you stop whatever the State Department's trying to do. So we tell them you can't teach critical race theory. They try to find ways around that. We tell them they can't push transgenderism on kids. They come to teachers' defenses who still do it. But we've been very clear. If you're going to come into our state and you're going to push left-wing indoctrination on kids, you're not going to teach any longer. You're not going to teach in the state of Oklahoma. We want teachers that are there to empower kids through an education, not turn them into social justice warriors, and we're going to continue to hold the line on that.
So I got to ask a lot of people get into politics, they don't want to run for state school superintendent. Why state school superintendent?
You know, my background is as a public school teacher. I've got 4 little kids at home. And you start looking at the future of the country, you start looking at the direction we're in. You know, President Trump talks about making America great again. We're living in a society where I don't know how many folks we still have that understand what made America great in the first place. And if you don't have that, if you don't have that central understanding of our history as a country, we're not going to make it. I mean, history, again, I'm a history teacher. History's lessons are very clear on this, right? When civilization, when a group of people forget who they are, when they reject their history, when they reject values, when they reject principles, they fall. And what we've seen here in America is our kids have been lied to. Our kids have been lied to since they were 3 and 4 years old in school. They have been told to hate their country. They have been told that religion did not play a role in the history of this country. Folks, that's a lie. That is a lie. You can... we made an announcement a few weeks ago, made a lot of leftists pretty upset.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this one.
We put the Bible back in every classroom.
Yay!
Folks, it is irrefutable that the Bible played an incredible role in this nation's history. You can go back to the Pilgrims, you can go to the Puritans, you can go to George Washington, John Adams, you can go to Abraham Lincoln, you can go up to Martin Luther King Jr. and his letter from a Birmingham jail. These individuals cited the Bible as inspiration for what they were doing. And the fact that we've allowed schools to say, no, you can't have a mention of the Bible, you can't have a physical Bible in a school. They have completely turned schools into state-sponsored atheist centers, where, hey, you can only talk about our history in a secular manner. Well, that is not true. That is lying to kids. And it does not give kids an accurate picture of where this country came from, what our founders believed, what our rights come from God. Well, how do you explain that to kids if you don't explain anything about God or about what the context was of Thomas Jefferson's words? It's so important that our kids get that true understanding of American history, that they're able to have that love for our country and understand the core principles we were built upon so that we can have a path forward to be a successful country.
Okay, now we have to go off on a tangent here. History teacher, what's your favorite area of history?
The founding era. I mean, hey, I can sit there. My kids in class, you got me on a tangent here, right? But we love, I would read every Federalist paper with the kids, every anti-Federalist paper, and we would do this deep dive. And again, you asked the question. So,
we're going to stay here for a minute.
One of my biggest frustrations is when you look at how the left has been able to do what they do, how they've been able to indoctrinate kids, they're not even letting kids read the Constitution. They're not letting them read. They have to read what some professor said about the Constitution. Okay, that's absurd on 2 levels, folks. Number one, your kids are smart enough to read and understand the Constitution. That's part of the beauty of what the founders did. Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence wrote this unbelievable document that you can read and understand. You can. And so it's an insult to the intelligence of our young people to act like they can't understand it and study it. Number one. Number two, but it's intentional, folks. It is done so they can lie about the founding. It is done so that they can lie to your kids about this country because they want your kids to hate this country. If you have no understanding of it and you only understand it through the prism of what leftists say about it, you can completely indoctrinate your kids.
So it's funny you say this because my 10th grade history teacher was a lady named Kathy Welch who the day after Clinton beat Bush came into class and put on To Kill a Mockingbird and said, I can't teach today. She was that upset. She's super Republican. Something about history teachers, I guess. She made a point one time in class in 10th grade. I'm in a 10th grade class in public school, Louisiana, and she brings up abortion, and we've read the Constitution. She says, now find abortion in the Constitution. And she gives this lecture. She says the problem with whether you believe this or not is that if we can have judges say this, we can't read our founding documents and govern ourselves. We have to rely on these black-robed people to do it. So I'm glad you said that. And the founding, ancient history and the founding are my two favorite areas of history. And when I was in college, I had a great history professor. His father was a major theologian in the Presbyterian Church in America, where I am, a good conservative guy. And he made me read The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution from Bernard Bailyn. Great book. And when the 1619 Project came out, and what's her name is out there saying that this country was founded on this, like, wait a second, I recall this book I read, and if you don't understand this book, so The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, this historian Bernard Bailyn, instead of reading the papers of John Adams and George Washington, he read the papers of the diaries of the local butcher in Philadelphia and the silversmith in Boston. And it turns out all of these middle class and lower income people were well educated and really believed that we got to fight the British for our liberties. And by the way, they really hated slavery, which was reading this book. It's just like, man, they really are lying about American history, trying to get it into the classroom.
And you know, we've gone to a place, and you have seen it, the left has controlled education for decades. But what you've seen now, especially with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the teachers union partnering with the Department of Education to attack parents, to attack families, it's at a whole new level. So just to show you, just to give you some clarity here on the fight in Oklahoma, I am literally being sued in the Oklahoma State Supreme Court by school districts that want to bring genderqueer and flamer back to their schools because I threw out all that pornography the leftists were pushing. They are suing me in the state Supreme Court to bring that back, while at the same time saying they're going to refuse to allow the Bible, the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence in every classroom. That's the fight we're having, folks. They are clearly trying to indoctrinate your kids with the most radical ideology this country's ever seen, while at the same time not wanting kids to, first of all, I'm going to tell you, not only will kids understand American history when they read what the founder said, I'm going to tell you, they're going to love this country. One of the other favorite things I love to do with kids in my class was I'd have them read the letters from the soldiers in World War II, what they wrote back home. Well, let me tell you, they knew what they were risking their lives for. They knew that as much as they loved their family back home, America was worth fighting for. America was worth dying for. We've gone from a country that taught our young people who went to war that loved their country that much to a country that has developed a hatred of our country and our history from our young people because we've allowed our schools to lie to our kids.
So I have a side question we can get into later. Your name being Ryan, when I had Kevin sitting, Kevin Hearn here yesterday, I thought you had to be a Kevin to get elected. But Kevin Hearn pointed out that you can't find a Democrat in Oklahoma, and yet this is happening in Oklahoma, a conservative state. That kind of, I think, is something you should put the spotlight on and blow people's minds that you got all these people with R's next to their names who may or may not be elected, but aren't necessarily down with a conservative agenda.
And folks, and it's time for, we've got to play offense. I'm a firm believer, Republicans, we've got to play offense. We have the core principles, we have the policy agenda that works. Eric, I'm telling you, we go in, and here's a shocker, we have full school choice in Oklahoma. You, the parent, can send your kid to a private school, Christian school, charter school, homeschool. We want you to make that decision, right? We do merit pay for teachers. Crazy concept. You do a great job, we want to pay you more, right? Mm-hmm. We introduced signing bonuses and pay for performance for tutoring. Hey, we want kids to get caught back up quickly. We want to see this performance. We bring accountability to districts. You're not going to stay in the bottom 5% in our state. We got over 100 schools out of the bottom 5%. Never been done before in the state of Oklahoma. Never had more than 40 jump off of our F list. We had over 100 last year because we came in, we brought accountability, we brought transparency. It can work, but as Republicans, you can't look at institutions like education that have been controlled by leftists for decades and do policy initiatives that just move the needle that much. We have to go play offense and drastically change the direction of our education system to put the country back on the right track. And I'll just be clear, we've so often looked at education as a little silo, don't we? It's like, well, the schools are over there and everything else in America or culture or society is outside of that. That's not the way to look at education. The reality is education touches everything. So when we allow the left to control our schools, guess what? They lie to our kids about our country. They turned our kids into social justice warriors. They created a victim mentality in our kids. They told our kids from when they were this tall that you're not responsible for your own actions, you're a victim. And then we wonder why kids grow up and burn down cities. We have literally allowed the left to control the trajectory of this country, every aspect of it, through our education system. Folks, we're laying out a blueprint in Oklahoma. We have to play offense. Our principles work. Our values will show themselves to be true, but we've got to go and move the needle and fight back against this radical agenda.
Judy, I want to hone in on a different angle with schools. So my wife's sisters are both teachers, and the oldest retired. She'd been a first grade teacher for a long time, and in a public school, and she said she kind of just got frustrated because she wasn't teaching anymore. She was a paper pusher. The administrative bureaucracy that the public school systems, and not just because of state regulation, but because of federal regulation, is just overwhelming teachers who want to teach and they can't. They become bureaucrats. So how do you fight that?
Well, number one, you should abolish the Federal Department of Education. Period.
Yeah!
History. Can you imagine George Washington and John Adams if you told them, you guys know, it's going to take a couple of centuries, but there's going to be a federal Department of Education that dictates to schools like Joe Biden did a few months ago. Do you remember this? He woke up one morning and decided, now I think boys can be girls, so I'm going to try to dictate to every state. They have to allow boys in the girls' bathroom. They have to allow boys in girls' sports. We were the first state. I stood up and said, we will never comply with that, ever. Number one, and we're going to sue you over it. You can't just wake up one morning and decide that you're going to force this issue on the states. The reality is there should never be a federal Department of Education. They push all these ideologies I discussed earlier, but they also are this massive bureaucracy that tries to dictate to states what education should look like. We should abolish that department. All power for education should return to the states, and the states should do what we do in Oklahoma, return all that power back to families. Here's the reality. The breakdown of the family unit is one of the most destructive forces in America today, if not the most destructive. Everything that a state does, especially in education, should be done in order to strengthen the family. I talk to my staff about that every day. How does this strengthen the family? How does this make families more involved in their kids' lives? How does this let them know more about the options that are available to them? How does this encourage? Look, there are some families where we want to encourage them to be even more involved. Hey, we want you to come in. With our tutoring programs, we have the parents come in for them. Hey, we want you to see everything we're talking to your kids about. We want you to see the curriculum. So it's so important that in everything that you do, you are strengthening the family. And folks, I get asked the question a lot about, Democrats, policies that are destructive of the family unit. Folks, I believe it's intentional. I'm sorry. I just cannot believe that the Democrats, it just so happens that every policy agenda item they've pushed for the last few decades just happens to destroy the family. Folks, I believe that they want to destroy the family unit. I believe that they want to destroy our faith. I believe that they want to destroy the fabric that holds this country together because they want to reshape it, don't they? They have a Marxist worldview. And the Marxists have been clear. We are control populations through education centers. We control them through destroying faith by attacking the family unit. And our Democrats today are no different. That is their goal, is to undermine those things. So Republicans, we have to be the party that strengthens the family unit, that strengthens religious liberty, and make sure that our kids understand that.
So in other words, what you're saying is a couple of years ago at one of the Democratic conventions when they said the government's the only thing we all belong to, we should believe them. Yeah.
They say, that's the thing. When you look at this Harris and Walz ticket, they are saying, they're not even hiding it. If elected, this would be the most anti-Christian administration this country has ever seen. That look at what's going on our college campuses. Look at the attack on Jewish students. You ever think, hey, look, we knew that the college campuses were left-wing indoctrination centers. We knew that, right? Did you ever think that Jewish families would have to fear for the safety of their kids if they sent them to some certain colleges and universities? That's how far we've come as a country by letting the left. Again, they're saying it. Like you said, Eric, you got to believe them when they say it. They're telling you what they're about.
So this is outside your wheelhouse, State School Superintendent, so I apologize in advance, but it's still on this topic. On a panel discussion earlier, we're talking about the rise of the Confucius Institutes that the Chinese have done, but they're also trying to see, you should learn Mandarin curriculums for elementary and secondary schools in the country. How has Oklahoma pushed back on this sort of stuff?
Folks, this blew my mind when it was first brought to my attention. We had our largest school district that partnered with the Chinese Communist Party to teach curriculum to kids about Chinese history and American history. Took money from the Chinese Communist government. Well, when I found out, not only did we kill that contract, we said no school, we passed a rule, no school in the state of Oklahoma will ever take money from an adversarial foreign government. Then folks, I got a call from Congress. I went and testified at Congress because guess what we found out? This wasn't just happening at a random school in Oklahoma. Governor DeSantis down in Florida found over a dozen in Florida that were doing the same thing. It was going on all across the country. So I went and testified before Congress. We should pass national legislation. This is a national security issue, folks. I just told you about left-wing teachers union teachers trying to indoctrinate our kids to hate this country. We have literally allowed the Chinese Communist Party to come into our country to convince kids to hate our country and believe they're the good guys. It's such an absurd level of malpractice on our education institutions, but it just shows you the hatred for the country by so many folks inside the teachers unions. We have to make sure that we protect our kids. And I'm gonna tell you the other thing they do with this, Eric. They want your kids' data. They want the information on your kids. So they want to indoctrinate them, but they also, that's where they keep doing these data hits. That's one of the things we were talking to the feds about as well, that, you know, some of those intelligence agencies. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to get a hold of data from our school systems. They're trying to get a hold of information. So again, they want to indoctrinate your kids, but they also want that data. They want that intel.
Okay, well, I'm glad I asked you the question because I assumed it was more of a meta issue for Oklahoma. That's actually kind of wild that the school systems were willing to take the money. So did they know where the money was coming from?
Now that's a good question. What the Chinese Communist Party did is they funneled it through a nonprofit. So that's where we had to take certain steps to get to it. But the nonprofit was associated with the communists. So it's guys, y'all are trying to make these excuses, but that's how they were getting around our you know, why did they do that? Well, look, let me take a step back. Why did they funnel it through a nonprofit? So we couldn't tell that the money was coming directly from the Chinese Communist Party. Because again, we'd already passed rules and laws that said, listen, we need to see all the money coming into a school, except for the union fought for a little loophole. The loophole was unless it comes through a nonprofit. So it's unbelievable the efforts they will go to hide information from families, to hide information from the public. And so that's where now we say, look, it doesn't matter where you get the money from. You're going to have to disclose that because we can never allow a situation like that to happen again.
The last couple of minutes we've got, let me talk to you about the setup for school choice in Oklahoma. You mentioned like private schools, homeschools, charter schools. Just how expansive are the options for families? Not that I want anyone to move to Oklahoma unless you're contributing to traffic here in Atlanta, but then yeah, please move to Oklahoma City. What are the options available for family moves to Oklahoma? What does it look like for school choice?
Yeah, so here's the way it works. Is you get a refundable tax credit, so on the front end, to go to a private school or a homeschool. So you can go to any private school in the state, you can go to a homeschool situation as well and be able to use that money to buy those own funds. Because again, if you want to homeschool your kids, spend more time with your kids, and you're able to do that, we want you to be able to do that. So our tax credit also applies for homeschooling. And Eric?
Are there really people who want to do that, spend more time with their kids? Just trying to get mine out of the house. She's sitting over.
I will tell you this though, this is the national model. We should absolutely have federal school choice through a tax credit program like Oklahoma's to say, any state, no matter where you live in the country, you want to put your kids in hey, your public school is gone woke on you, they're telling your kids to hate this country, they're dangerous, we see that all the time as well. Get them in a private school, get them in a charter school, homeschool them if you can. This is how we should do this nationally. So I told you earlier, we should abolish the Federal Department of Education. We should have national school choice tax credit so that families can mobilize, move their kids where they need to. But yeah, hey, look, move to Oklahoma. We have a tax credit there available for you now. The country should follow. When President Trump gets elected, that'll happen. But until then, move to Oklahoma. And I'm going to tell you one other thing. Hey, we give teachers $50,000 signing bonuses if you're in the top 10% of the country and you're effective. So hey, we're on this. And guys, you know what they told me from the beginning? You going against the teachers union, you're going to run off all of these teachers. Well, you know what? If you're a social justice warrior, yes. But guess what? We've been able to recruit teachers from all over the country because we've said, hey, if you do a great job, we'll pay you more. We're going to bring discipline back to the classroom. We want our kids to love this country. We've had teachers from all over the country move Oklahoma teachers, so we want parents to move in. We have been very clear with an education vision that it's working. And again, I think it's just, we've got to play offense. This is a great example of that. The policies work. The conservative ideas are based in truth, they're based in history. These policies, once implemented, show success. And by the way, that's why they're so mad. That's why Randy Weingarten, she put me on the screen and put a target over us. You know, there were 6 or 7 of us, but I was on her screen there at her national convention a few weeks ago. Why? Because not only are we saying it, we're doing it. And the results are coming in. And it's effective. And that's what scares them the most.
So I got to ask you on a side political tangent here, because you are targeted by the teachers unions. I've got a lot of people in the room. There's some here from Oklahoma, a lot of people who aren't. If they want to help you fight back with teachers unions, what should they be doing to help you in your fight?
Well, I appreciate that. As Eric pointed out earlier, follow me on Twitter. We have some pretty interesting back and forths on Twitter, so we have some fun on that. Also, there's a website, RyanWaltersForOklahoma.com, where you can follow the work we're doing. But folks, let me tell you, in every state, we should be getting good folks on every single school board. Every single school board. We should be getting parents involved and engaged. There's a reason why the Biden administration and Kamala Harris partnered with the teachers union to weaponize our federal government against parents that show up at school board meetings. You remember that? Remember that when they started investigating those parents? Because that's an incredible accountability tool. I always tell parents, if you can't get the answer privately, if they won't tell you something, make it public. Let the whole city, let the county see what the school is keeping from you as a parent, because God gave you your kids, okay? You were the person that was entrusted with your child. Don't ever let some bureaucrat tell you otherwise. And so that's why they fought against that so much. So folks, absolutely have to get good folks on school boards. Have to continue to fight back against that woke indoctrination by getting parents involved. Folks, we've got to get President Trump elected. We absolutely have to. We've got to get the ability to abolish the Department of Education, get national school choice done, get our schools back to a place where, again, we want you to know American history. But look, I'm unapologetic. I want you to love this country. I want you to love this country. I want you to understand those core principles we were built on. G.K. Chesterton said we're the only country that was founded on a creed. Okay? What was that creed? What are our founding principles? Why did John Adams say that this Constitution was made for immoral people? Our kids need to know that. Your kids understand that. Your kids love this country. Your kids have their whole life in front of them to be very successful, have a great high quality of life, but also to continue making this the best country in the history of the world.
Ryan, listen, just a long flight out from Oklahoma to get here to hang out with us, and I'm sure I'm glad you did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Is he about your size? Is he what? Is he about your size? Yeah. Oh, 21, man.
Alright, I can look this one real quick. So I got to, I'm not going to quite throw under the bus my next guest. I'm not. But I do need you to know that the whole reason that we're doing this weekend is because last year I wanted to get Dave McCormick to come to the event. Brian Kemp. It's like, you gotta get Dave. He's the most impressive candidate we've seen, and we think we can get him to run for the Senate. He's that good. You gotta get him. He's like, oh, I can't, birthday weekend, I gotta be with the family. And so this year reached out, well, can't, birthday weekend, gotta be with the family. It's like, what if I move my entire event by a week? Can we get you here? Now, there is a downside, is there were a couple other Senate candidates that we also wanted to get, and we moved it to this weekend because I wanted to make sure we got Dave McCormick, because the governor said, you gotta get Dave McCormick, people need to see him. Then it turns out that this is state fair weekend in Montana and Wisconsin, so we wanted to get Sheehy and Hoofdy here as well. They're like, we can't, it's the state fair, we gotta be the state fair. That's okay, because I wanna win Pennsylvania, because it's the Keystone State, and we gotta beat Bob Casey. He's terrible. And we could have had an opportunity the last time to get McCormick and the Republicans by like 1/10 of a point, win in a different direction, and we didn't win the seat. We can win the Pennsylvania Senate seat, we can win it for the presidency, and we've got the candidate who can do it. Brian Kemp and I both have been trying to get him here with this crowd so that you guys can see we have such an impressive pick for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania, and that would be Dave McCormick. We got a because we're both such big fans of yours.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So if you wouldn't mind giving the crowd just some of your biography, because, and again, we're talking business people running for office as opposed to just people who've been lawyers all their lives.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. I'm a Pennsylvania kid, a 7th generation Pennsylvanian. My dad was born in Indiana County. My mom was in Punxsutawney, so I always like to say that because I'm running against Punxsutawney Bob, who only pops his head up once every 6 years. And I grew up I was born in Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in Bloomsburg, not far from where Bob Casey grew up. And my folks had a farm, and I lived in town, but I baled hay and trimmed Christmas trees. And in Pennsylvania, wrestling is the big sport. So I wrestled in high school. Wrestling got me to West Point. I wrestled in college, and then served in the 82nd Airborne Division. Went to Iraq, and West Point for me, and we'll come back to this in Senate race. Duty, honor, country was what you learn there, and I've tried to live by that ever since. After the Army, I came back to Pennsylvania. I ran a tech company in Pittsburgh. They created hundreds of jobs. It was a software company. Went and worked in the administration of President Bush in the White House, Deputy National Security Advisor, and then went and ran a big company called Bridgewater for 12 years, and resigned in 2021 to run for the Senate in Pennsylvania, where I lost a close one by 900 votes.
Yes.
You know.
Okay, so now a side note here, I got to tell on myself. So his dad was in charge of public colleges in Pennsylvania, right? So I've interviewed him on radio. Now, I'm from the South. I hear University of Pennsylvania, I'm thinking, oh, state run. It's not. He was so diplomatic and pointed out, actually, my father wasn't in charge of that. He was public schools. But at the same time, University of Pennsylvania, we've had this wild situation up there with the anti-Semitic protests. And it's just, I was kind of stunned at a school like UPenn that has such a great business school reputation. I didn't really realize how infested that sort of anti-Semitic sentiment could be at a place like that.
Well, listen, I think we've all, post October 7th, as you know, my wife and I, Dina, went to Israel.
And by the way, his wife is actually more awesome than him.
Hey, outside, she is more awesome than my life. If she were here, she would agree. And we went to Israel. We went to Kfar Aza. We saw firsthand this butchery, this horrific evil. We met with hostage families. We met with survivors. You can't go there without coming away with the sense that we need to support Israel to destroy this evilness. And it's not just Hamas against Israel. It's Hezbollah, it's Islamic Jihad. The original sin is Iran. The reason this is connected to the protests. Iran, which is the original sin, in 2015 we did the Iran deal, using hundreds of billions of dollars to underwrite terrorist proxies around the world and around the Middle East. The deciding vote was Bob Casey, my opponent. So that context, I travel across the Commonwealth, Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania. We have these kids protesting. I go to the protests where the encampment. The evilness, the vile things that are being said. Jewish kids intimidated that don't want to go to class. And you say, my God, how could that happen on our nation's campuses? This anti-Americanism, this anti-Semitism. And then you watch those 3 college presidents testify, and they're tying themselves in pretzels, not to say what's right or wrong, good or evil. You say, that's not happening. A lack of moral clarity, a lack of leadership. And that is one of the reasons I think we're in spiritual decline. I think this is evidence of a spiritual decline in our country. And this is a time we need courageous leaders. And my opponent, Bob Casey, is the opposite of that. Weak, has been unwilling to stand up and take a strong stand on just about anything, including anti-Semitism.
So for the last 3 weeks in a row, I think, I have been playing your ads on my radio show because I think your campaign team has done a better job defining Kamala Harris and Bob Casey's ties to her than anybody in the country. It is remarkable to watch her suddenly say, I'm actually for fracking after campaigning against it. And also to watch Bob Casey, who, his dad was like the pro-life icon. And of course he gets to the U.S. Senate and betrays those values and walks away from that. He really has been a disappointment.
Yeah, this is why I'm very optimistic about November. I don't mean we don't have to bear down and run a great campaign in Pennsylvania, a great campaign nationally. But at least in Pennsylvania, we ran the ad you spoke about when Senator Casey came out and endorsed Kamala Harris. My team put together, it was just an internal thing, a 22-year-old kid on the team, put together this digital commercial. And it started by Bob Casey saying, listen, she's ready to be president today. You're gonna love her when you get to know her. And then it had 60 seconds. No Republican voice, no voiceover, nothing. It just had Kamala Harris saying, I want to ban fracking. I want to transition energy workers. I want to legalize illegal immigration. I want to make sure they have federal benefits. I want to have mandatory buybacks of guns. I want to have elimination of private health insurance. I want to reduce the consumption of red meat. Now, I'm not a political expert, but in Pennsylvania, if you're running on banning fracking, taking your guns and taking away red meat, you're in trouble, right? So we just ran that commercial, and then at the end it has Bob Casey saying, she's ready to be president today, you're gonna love her when you get to know her. And I think that is the way that we're gonna win. This is a radical agenda. People in Pennsylvania, and I don't think most people in America wanna have a set of policies that have failed so miserably in San Francisco. And so I think the way we beat Bob Casey and the way we beat Kamala Harris is to say it's a failed record on inflation, on border, on crime, on energy. 80% of Pennsylvanians think the country's going in the wrong direction. If you pick Kamala Harris and Bob Casey, I say them side by side because he's a 98% vote for the Biden-Harris agenda, you're gonna have worse. You're gonna have a liberal agenda that's gonna take our country in a direction where you're gonna wake up and you're not gonna recognize it. And you don't have to believe me, just listen to her.
So Ed Rendell, the former governor, obviously I know you'll disagree with this characterization, but he did have this, it was a funny line when he said it, that Pennsylvania, you have to think of, you have Pittsburgh in the west, Philadelphia in the east, and the Confederacy in between. And his comparison to speak, you've got these two major urban centers in the east and west of the state. You've got a lot of rural Pennsylvania, the T they talk about, Erie, then up in the northwest. How do you campaign and build a message between such diverse groups?
Well, I grew sometimes they say it's Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Alabama. I grew up in the Alabama part. Like I grew up in a very conservative part of Pennsylvania. And here's the good news, I'm announcing it today. Pennsylvania's becoming red. Pennsylvania's, by 2026, if you have me back here, we're gonna be red. That's hard to believe.
Yeah!
So in 2016, when President Trump won, we had 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans. Today we have 360,000. By election day, we'll have 300,000. And by 2026, we'll be red. So it's moving. And part of the reason it's moving is because working families are flipping. That the Democratic Party is becoming the party of the elite. The Republican Party is becoming a party that's dealing with working families. So what you have to do, we have of 67 counties, 56 of them are red. You gotta get out the vote. You can't take it for granted. You gotta tell them that their vote is gonna be the difference between winning and losing. Then there's 11 counties that are purple or blue. And in those counties, there's persuadable voters. These are independents. 11% of our voters are independents. They think the country's going down over the cliff. You got to appeal to them. There's conservative Democrats, Jewish Democrats. We have 300,000 registered Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. 80% of them are Democrats. Do you think they look at what's going on in the television and think that the Democratic Party is serving them well? There's a real opportunity there. African Americans. President Trump right now, the polls are very volatile, he's polling at 40% among African American males. If he came in at 20%, that would be a game changer, and if I can capture some of that. So there are multiple ways to win. The key is, the foundation is that base. And those 56 counties, those rural counties, you gotta get them out to vote. You gotta convince people that their future depends on it. I did a talk at Penn State the other day, and I stopped in the middle of it. It's 50 kids of the college Republicans at Penn State. They have been the only Republicans at Penn State. But I got them in a room and I said, listen, I'm gonna be okay regardless of what happens in this election. I'm 58. I got more years behind me than in front of me. But for you young people, you gotta vote and get active like your life depends on it, because it does. The country that we all have appreciated and loved and been benefited from, it's not gonna be there for them. So we gotta get people mobilized in this election, the significance of it. It really is, all politicians have said this forever, but this really is the most important election of our lifetimes. And the consequences of getting it wrong, Kamala Harris, a Democratic Senate, say goodbye to the filibuster, say hello to 4 new Senate seats in Puerto Rico and Washington, say hello to Supreme Court packing, say hello to new taxes. I mean, this is going to be a wide open border, legalization of illegal immigrants. It'll be a country we won't recognize. That's why we got to get people out the vote. We got to win.
I want to test your political acumen and diplomatic skills. Philly sports or Pittsburgh sports?
You know, you can't have it both ways. You gotta, I'm Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when I'm in Philadelphia, I don't say anything bad about Philadelphia, but I'm a Pittsburgh kid, and I'm a big.
That's good. You know, so I've only been to Pennsylvania a couple of times, and every time I always hear like there seems to be this stigma for Pittsburgh. I think it's one of the coolest entryways into any city in America. You come through this tunnel, and suddenly you've got the river in the city. It's just the coolest entrance to any city.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I lived there. I have 6 daughters now, but I had 4 biological daughters, and 3 of them I had in Pittsburgh, and I lived a big part of my life there. But I got to tell you, and it's beautiful. But I got to tell you, it's sad now. And I attribute it to many of the failed policies of Biden, Casey, Harris, that direction of our country, particularly as it relates to crime. And downtown Pittsburgh today is a shell of what it was when I ran a company there. And just to put in perspective, we had 1,000 police officers in 2020 in Pittsburgh Police Force. We have 650 today. Wow. So 4 years later, we have 650. It's 2/3 of what it was. In my neighborhood, I live in Squirrel Hill, which is in the city right near University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. And the patrols in my neighborhood are half what they were 4 years ago. And this is a problem across Pennsylvania and much of America, where the combination of the defund the police movement, the lack of support for qualified immunity, just the lack of public leaders standing behind law enforcement has gutted our law enforcement community. And it's a huge deal. And so we see the fentanyl crisis, we see crime going up in these urban centers, storefronts closing, with remote work, we don't have enough people downtown. We have the homeless problem, we have illegal immigrants that are encamping in our urban centers. Philadelphia is unrecognizable. So this is a big difference between us and them. This is a big difference between the world that Kamala Harris and Bob Casey won. Bob Casey supported the defunding of the police movement. He won't stand for qualified. I have this great picture in an ad of Bob Casey taking a knee with a Biden COVID mask on and his fist up in the air. I said, if that doesn't win me the election in Pennsylvania, so this is an ideology that really is going to destroy our communities. And I was doing a fundraiser out west, and I was describing out in California. I was describing, we got this crazy district attorney in Philadelphia. You're not going to believe me. Soros funded a guy named Larry Krasner. He's got this rule where if you steal less than $1,000, you don't get prosecuted. I mean, you're not going to believe it. And these were a bunch of California Republicans, and they said, oh yeah, we had that rule in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and it was the beginning of the end in terms of San Francisco just being destroyed. That's the ideology we're fighting against, and Bob Casey is not only not fought against it, he's been a weak and enabler of it.
So we talk about Pittsburgh. You've got this massive population base in Philadelphia that leans pretty Democrat, media markets that bleed in that are pretty hostile to you. How do you go in and find the persuadable people there as a candidate to try to convince them they need to abandon the Casey name that they've known for so long in politics in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, there's 5 counties in southeast Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia's one. Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware are the other 4. Bucks, we just flipped. Bucks is now more Republican, registered Republicans than Democrats. And the key is to be in those 4 counties, not Philadelphia directly, is to be very focused on the kitchen table issues. Number 1's inflation. So for 60% of Pennsylvanians and for most Americans, they're living paycheck to paycheck. You have to remind yourself of that almost every day. 60% living paycheck to paycheck. So when prices go up by 21% and wages haven't kept up, these folks are getting squeezed on food, fuel, and rent. It's the same in the rural counties as it is in those suburban counties. And that inflation is the direct result of terrible policy. 2 things. One, it's Republicans and Democrats have been spending too much for 20 years, but it's been a hockey stick under Biden. $7 trillion of new spending. That's been the direct driver of inflation. That plus a war on fossil fuels. So when you talk to people in Pennsylvania, you know, there's social issues and so that are energizing among some. But the number one issue is the economy. The economy's not working. And that applies to those collar counties. And by the way, inflation's not a Republican problem or an independent problem or a Democratic problem. That's killing us all. The second issue is the border. And you say, why is the border such a big deal in Pennsylvania? Well, the number one reason, we see the illegal immigrants are depressing wages, we see the burden on social services. We have 13 sanctuary cities or counties in Pennsylvania, so it's a big pervasive issue. But the number one reason is fentanyl. We lost 4,000 Pennsylvanians last year from fentanyl, 4,000. And we lost 100,000 nationally. So for you, those of you in the audience that were in the Vietnam era, just to put this in perspective, we lost 53,000 Americans in 8 years of war in Vietnam. We had 2 Vietnams last year. Fentanyl coming across our borders, the cartels, the distribution network, wide open borders that comes across legal and illegal entries. And this is poison in every way. And the Biden administration and Bob Casey's been with him every step of the way, hasn't stopped it. They haven't had they didn't finish the wall. They haven't had Remain in Mexico. They haven't supported the Border Patrol. I went to see this myself a couple times. I've been to the border more times than the borders are. And Senator Dixon. And when you get there, it is stunning. And I'll just tell you a little quick story. I'll be really, really quick. There's lots to talk about. But I went to Yuma, Arizona about 6 weeks ago. I'm standing at the border at 2 in the morning in Yuma, Arizona with the Border Patrol. And you're walking along, there's this incredible wall, and then the wall stops. And 300 yards away, there's a storage area where you see all this steel that was purchased to finish the wall, but Biden stopped it on day 1. And we paid for the labor for this too. So the wall stops at 2 in the morning, right in front of me. This isn't something I saw on Fox News. 50 people walk across the border, right in front of me. And in that group of 50 that I personally saw, 5 military-age men from Syria and 5 Chinese nationals. Just in the 50 I saw. 10 million have crossed the border, hundreds on the terrorist watch list. We are, I'll make a prediction here, which I hope doesn't come true. We have no idea the national security risk that's become embedded in our country over the last 3.5 years. I mean, people from all over the world, these aren't from Mexico or Central America. These are people from Central Asia, people from the Middle East. This is a national security threat that I'm sad to say I think will come home to roost sometime down the road.
I'm afraid so. You know, the difference between you and a Democrat is if a Democrat had been down there, they would have gotten registered votes. They can't cross the border.
That's exactly right. That's exactly. And Eric, you know this, but sometimes people miss that. You know, the illegal immigrants are legally allowed to vote. However, the Democrats and Bob Casey was supported this with a vote. Those 10 million illegal immigrants are counted in the census. I mean, this is huge. This is huge. This is a right in front of us. There's the election in the following sense. Those 10 million people get counted in the census. That directs how many congressional seats are given to particularly blue states like New York and California. And of course, those electoral seats determine the number of votes in the electoral college. So if you want to think about stacking the deck, those 10 million illegal immigrants counted in the census is something that's happening right in front of us, and it's going to do huge damage. Not to mention the fact that Kamala Harris has said, and Bob Casey will support, legalizing those illegal immigrants once they get into office.
All right, you went there because this is I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. This is my actual, I am convinced that as so many people leave New York, Illinois, in California and places like that they actually are using an illegal immigrant population to pop up a census count just so they don't lose congressional districts.
I don't think that census vote isn't directly a political calculation. I agree with that. I mean, they're not hiding it. They're going right up front. What's the logic for saying 10 million illegal immigrants should be counted in the census? What's the logic? There is no logic other than a political logic. And I think it's a real problem. I mean, in Pennsylvania, obviously Pennsylvania's been the center of a lot of debate and uncertainty and chaos around whether the elections are going to be fair. And so we're putting a huge effort in making sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure we have an army of observers, to make sure we have the right legal support, to make sure we clean the voter rolls, to make sure we have the right inspections of the voting machines, to make sure we have the right observation of block boxes, or drop boxes rather, because it's going to be so close. This is going to be a close race. I'm going to win this by a point or two.
So you mentioned that. I thought it was notable that when Senator McConnell was here yesterday, he was talking about needing to win more elections and how good our candidate quality was this year. And he always does it in the order of the races that he thinks are the most viable. And obviously West Virginia flipping it seems very, very interesting. He put you very high on the list of seats that he thinks that we can win, which I think is very notable for him to be able to do that.
Yeah, listen, I think, here's what I honestly think. I think our country is in deep trouble. I mean, I honestly do. When my wife and I were debating whether to run after losing last time, we kept saying, let's move on with our lives. We're almost empty nesters. We have one daughter left. We have 6 daughters. One daughter left who is at senior high school. We talked to our daughters about it. They're not exactly for me running. By that I mean they're 100% opposed to me running. But every time I went to pick up the phone and move on and take a job or join a board or something, I just kept getting pulled back to this moment, which is if you believe in America, you think America is the most exceptional country in the world, you've been blessed by America, which I bet most of you think you've been blessed by all America has to offer. If you think America's in deep trouble, which I do, and you think you can do something about it, then you got to do it. And I believe I believe I can and will win this seat. It's going to be tough, but 80% of Pennsylvanians think the country's going in the wrong direction. They don't buy into this crazy liberal, weak agenda. Bob Casey's been truly a terrible senator. And by terrible, I mean you can't point to one thing that he has done that's meaningfully changed the life of Pennsylvanians in 18 years. He's been a rubber stamp for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and he will be a rubber stamp for the even more weak liberal agenda of the future. So if you believe those things and you trust that Pennsylvanians are feeling the things that I'm saying, they want change. And polls go up and down, but the thing I feel on the ground is, and I suspect this is what Leader McConnell was talking about, man, there's energy. There is energy wherever I go because I think people want some. And by the way, what I say to everybody is, listen, I'd be honored to do this job. It's not the best job I will have ever had. I'm doing it out of love of country, and I don't know anybody anything. I don't know President Trump anything. I'm grateful for his support, but I don't know him anything. I don't know Leader McConnell anything. The only people I know anything to are the people of Pennsylvania. And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I'm going to be a strong voice for them and for our country. And so I feel honored to do it. I kind of feel like God has a plan, and we'll see if it's the plan I think it is.
Well, it's worth pointing out too. I mean, it's not too long. You had Senator Toomey, a great Republican senator who was able to win repeatedly there. You've had Republican governors recently there. So, I mean, sometimes I think Republicans think, oh, Pennsylvania, it's so far off there. Not really. You regularly get Republicans.
Well, particularly with that movement I was describing,
right?
Registration, we're becoming red at a time when the policies of the Democrats are more and more out of step with Pennsylvania.
So, if people here who aren't from Pennsylvania want to get involved and help you, what can they do?
Yeah, I have a website, DaveMcCormickPA.com, and I've tried to lay out on that website all my positions so people know what I'm about and why I'm running. And then, I did one yesterday. I've been doing a series of speeches, which seems like an anachronistic thing in the past. But I thought, boy, wouldn't it be good for the people of Pennsylvania to know where their senator would try to take the country and where he would vote. So I've laid out speeches on energy policy, which is a huge issue in Pennsylvania, family policy, how to make sure we're supporting families, a speech on China, a speech on how to break the bureaucracy of Washington. Last night, I gave one on national security, which I'm sad to say I think is a real looming issue. I think our security is really at risk beyond the border, but from adversaries around the world. And that agenda is also on there. And so it's one thing to win the race, which I plan to do. It's another thing to actually hit the ground and make a difference when you get there, and that's what I'm hoping I can do.
So if you do get there, and I really do hope you, literally, we moved the event this weekend because Brian and I wanted to get you here as badly as we did. If you get there, what committees are the ones that really interest you?
Well, I don't want to jinx myself by talking about committees. It seems like a sort of measuring curtains. What I will say is that I think of the many issues confronting us, and where we have one of the biggest contrasts is on energy. Energy policy under the direction of Biden and Harris, I think is taking us in a terrible direction. I think there's a focused effort to eliminate fossil fuel consumption. That's made us more dependent on China for lithium batteries and solar panels. That's driven up the price of energy for all Americans, and that's hurt industrial jobs and jobs across the country. So I will be a senator that wants to fight for energy dominance. And energy dominance is great for our national security because we're exporting our natural gas and energy around the world. Pennsylvania is the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world. If we were a country, we'd be number 4. We literally have Saudi Arabia under our feet in Pennsylvania. Saudi Arabia can pump 10 million barrels of petroleum a day. We have that much natural gas capacity under our feet. So unleashing that is critical for national security. It's incredible for our economy because these jobs, these young people, you know, I grew up thinking you had to get a college degree to have a great middle-class career. You don't. These are great skilled labor, trade jobs that'll last for decades. And here's the clincher. It's good for our environment. I'm an environmentalist, I'm a conservationist. I believe that the best way to curb carbon emissions globally is to export our great natural gas from places like Pennsylvania and replace coal-fired plants in India and China where they're just decades behind us. So this is an area where you could not have more of a stark difference between Kamala Harris and weak liberal Bob Casey and what a strong Republican vision will be. President Trump, I think, has a similar vision to what I just said. And that's where I think I can be a really strong voice because it's a national security issue, it's an economic issue, and Pennsylvania has a lot to offer America and the world when it comes to energy resources.
Dave, listen, I mean it. I wanted you to be here. I'm so glad you've come. I want you in the United States Senate more than most. So thank you. It's a trip down, it's a hike, but thank you very much for coming.
Listen, I'm honored to be here. Thanks so much. And I'll just finish by saying, in wrestling, which I said, as I said, I wrestled in college. I wasn't the best wrestler, but I always knew if I could get in the 3rd period and be within a point or two, I'd win because it's all about conditioning, intensity, heart, and staying on offense. And that's what it's going to require for these next 85 days. And so every morning when Bob Casey wakes up, I want him to say, oh my God, that guy's everywhere. He's in my face constantly. When will he go away? I'm not going away. And I won't go away when I'm in the United States Senate. So
Essentially, I guess we need to make him not see his shadow, so he goes away in better days.
We need to get him to debate. We need to get him. The more you see of Bob Casey and the more you see of Kamala Harris, I'm confident that Donald Trump and I will look a lot better.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And has been, it's just would be phenomenal to get him there. All right, I believe, all right, side tangent here. Oh, and look, my kid's not here. So 2-3 years ago, I was with my son at the golf course and I got hit in the head with the full forward force of his swing. Got a concussion. I don't remember 2 weeks of my life, and so I was recounting this last night, and my daughter was telling the story that I don't remember. I'm not a big fruit eater. I hate Wildberry Pop-Tarts. Hate them. Apparently, I would ask for Wildberry Pop-Tarts and then get mad when they brought them because I don't like them and couldn't understand why they brought them. She was regaling people with the story of me last night. They were like, you should subtly work in Pop-Tarts on stage. So I've now said the word Pop-Tarts and 3 people owe me money. And at the same time, it's my conference. Don't dare me to do that. We're not serving Pop-Tarts for lunch. We got a great lunch for you. We'll be back this afternoon. By the way, I do need to absolutely highlight for you Chip Roy, who I think many of you probably know who he is, will be here. And Rick Scott, the senator from Florida. When we did our 4th gathering in 2012, he was then the governor of Florida and hosted us in Jacksonville. And it's great to be able to have him back here. So enjoy your lunch. We'll be back in an hour.
Can you help me find Eric? Can you help me get in touch with Eric?
I mean, how do you mean?
Can you help me catch him?
Well, he just ran off the stage.
Oh.
He's backstage somewhere. I don't even know how to get all of those guys. I tried to walk in backstage and they yelled at me.
Oh man.
I'm gonna go to the. Okay, what's her name? Alicia's gonna bring you your lunch. I'm gonna go to the men's room if I get a chance.
If he does sign books, can you let me know?
Oh, well, he does. I
What's up?
don't know where he is, but we'll see what happens. Okay.
Okay.